There is a particular kind of person in this world who is drawn to kindness the way a predator is, drawn to stillness, not because they appreciate it, not because they are moved by it, or humbled by it, or inspired to return it, but because they mistake it for weakness. They look at a woman who is warm, who is generous, who gives without calculation and trusts without suspicion, and they think, she will never see it coming. They think, this one is safe to use. I know this kind of person. I know them with the specific, bone-deep knowledge that only comes from having loved one completely, and from having been betrayed by another at the same time. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old. I live in a mid-sized city in the kind of neighborhood where people know each other's names and wave from driveways and remember to ask about your mother when they see you at the grocery store. I work as a senior editor at a publishing company, a job I have spent 12 years building, word by careful word, manuscript by manuscript, through the particular slow burn of an ambition that never announced itself but never stopped moving either. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I do not perform emotion. I do not seek conflict. I am the person who smooths things over, who finds the middle ground, who believes genuinely, not naively, that most misunderstandings can be resolved with patience and honest conversation. I say this not to paint myself as a saint. I have flaws in abundance. I hold grudges longer than I admit. I overthink everything. I am occasionally so focused on keeping peace that I do not speak up when I should, but I am loyal. I am honest. And I have never, in my entire life, deliberately hurt someone who trusted me, which is perhaps why what happened felt so particularly, profoundly wrong. Because the two people who betrayed me were not strangers. They were not people I had known briefly, superficially, with the reasonable caution one applies to new relationships. They were the two people I trusted most in the world, and this is the story of what I did. When I found out, let me tell you about Serena first, because to understand the magnitude of what she did, you have to understand what she was to me. Not just a friend, that word is too small, too ordinary for what 11 years of shared history produces. Serena was the architecture of my adult life. She was woven into everything that we had met in the first week of college, two girls from different cities, assigned to rooms on the same dormitory floor, both arriving with too many books and not enough practical kitchen supplies. We had bonded initially over a shared hatred of the communal bathroom schedule, and a mutual love of a very specific kind of slow, melancholy music that nobody else our age seemed to appreciate. Within a month, we were inseparable. She was everything I was not, in the best possible way. Where I was measured and analytical, Serena was spontaneous and vivid. Where I planned carefully, she leaped first, and figured out the landing later. She made every room louder and warmer and more alive simply by walking into it. She remembered everyone's birthday, followed up on every small thing you mentioned in passing, showed up without being asked, without fanfare, when you needed someone there. She was the most present person I had ever known. I adored her, for 11 years. I adored her without reservation or qualification. Through the difficult relationships and the career setbacks and the losses, her father's illness, my mother's difficult year, the ordinary griefs that accumulate quietly in your 30s and require someone who knows you well, enough to sit with you without trying to fix everything. She was that person for me, and I believed with everything I had that I was that person for her. I was wrong about a great many things in this story, but that particular wrongness was the one that took the longest to grieve. Now let me tell you about James. I met James when I was 28, a mutual friend's birthday gathering, the kind of relaxed, low-key evening that produces, occasionally and without announcement, the people who will matter most in your life. He was standing near the back of the room when I noticed him, not doing anything remarkable, just listening to someone else's story with the particular quality of attention that most people reserve for their own. Really listening, not waiting for his turn to speak. That was the first thing I noticed about him. The second thing was that when the conversation turned to him, when someone asked what he had been reading lately, he answered with such genuine, unhurried enthusiasm that the whole small group leaned in slightly without realizing they had. I leaned in. James was an architect, not the corporate, commercial kind, the kind who worked on smaller, considered projects. Renovations of old buildings that deserved to be saved. Community spaces that needed someone to think carefully about how people actually moved through them. He cared about the work in a way that was evident and unperformed. And I found that after years of navigating a professional world full of carefully managed impressions extraordinarily attractive. We talked for most of that evening when the gathering wound down and people began filtering out into the night. He asked if I wanted to continue the conversation somewhere else. A coffee shop, still open. 3 blocks away, I said yes. We stayed until they closed. We were together for 18 months before he proposed. Not with elaborate ceremony. James was not a man for elaborate ceremony. A quiet evening at home, cooking dinner together. Music in the background. He had the ring in his jacket pocket, and at some point simply stopped what he was doing, took it out, and said with the same unhurried directness he brought to everything, "I want to do this with you. All of it. Everything from here." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We married 14 months later. A small wedding, intimate, deliberate, exactly what we both wanted. Serena was my maid of honor. She stood beside me at the front of a sunlit room, cried at all the right moments, and gave a speech afterward. That made everyone laugh and then go quiet and then laugh again. Was a perfect day. I have thought about that day many times since everything happened. Not with bitterness, the day itself was real. Whatever came after. The love I felt standing in that room was real. The version of my life I believed I was beginning was real. In the sense that I was truly living inside it. But the people around me were already, in ways I couldn't see, building something else entirely. Asterisk. The first 3 years of our marriage were good. I want to be accurate about that. There is a tendency, when a relationship ends in betrayal, to retroactively find the warning signs, to rewrite the history as a long accumulation of ignored evidence, to make sense of the ending by making the beginning suspicious. But that would not be honest. The first 3 years were genuinely, solidly good. We had our rhythms and our disagreements and our ordinary seasons of closeness and slight distance. The natural tidal patterns of 2 people sharing a life. We bought a house. We built friendships together. We had the kind of Saturday mornings that become the quiet, sustaining core of a life. Farmers markets and slow coffees, and the particular luxury of having nowhere to be. James was a good husband. Present, engaged, thoughtful in the specific, practical way of a person who shows love through action rather than declaration. He remembered things. He showed up. He was kind. Or so I believed. Serena remained my closest friend throughout all of it. She and James had developed their own warm dynamic over the years, as was natural. As was inevitable, given how much time we all spent together. They had inside jokes I wasn't part of, opinions about the same films, an easy banter that I found endearing. I found it endearing. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I looked at the 2 people who were betraying me, and I found their closeness endearing. Asterisk. The first sign came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a feeling. A shift in atmosphere so subtle I could not have named it or pointed to it, or explained it to anyone else. Just a slight, persistent wrongness. The emotional equivalent of a room that has been rearranged while you were away. Everything looks the same. But you know, without being able to say exactly how, that something has moved. It started, I think, about 8 months before I found out the truth. Looking back, the timing makes sense. 8 months before I found out was approximately when the situation began to change shape. When what had been, I later understood, a carefully contained secret began to put pressure on its own edges. Asterisk. But at the time, I had no framework for what I was sensing. No evidence. No specific thing I could point to and say there, that is the wrongness. Just a feeling. James was slightly less present. Not dramatically, he was not the kind of person who underwent sudden, obvious personality shifts. It was more like a dimming, a slight reduction in the particular quality of attention he had always brought to our relationship. I noticed that I told myself I was imagining it. That marriage in its 4th year had a different texture than marriage in its 1st year. And that was natural and normal and did not mean anything was wrong. I told myself that, but I kept noticing Serena. during this same period, was, if anything, more present than usual. She called more frequently. She was warmer in a way that, at the time, I absorbed with simple gratitude. She was more attentive, more interested, more there. I thought she was simply going through a difficult patch in her own life, seeking more connection. I thought I was the person she was turning to. I see it differently now. I understand. In retrospect, what that heightened warmth was, it was the particular overcompensation of a guilty conscience. The way a person who is taking something from you sometimes gives more in other ways, not from generosity, but from the need to manage their own sense of what they are doing. She wasn't turning to me, she was managing me, and I, who believed so completely in what we were to each other, felt only the warmth and none of the architecture beneath it. The moment of first knowing, not suspicion, not unease, but the first cold breath of actual knowing, came on a Wednesday evening in early spring. I had left work earlier than planned. A meeting pushed to the following morning. An unexpected gift of 2 recovered hours on an ordinary Wednesday. I came home through the back garden, a habit I had when the weather was bearable. A longer route that I preferred to the directness of the front door. The garden was beginning to come back to life after winter, and I had taken to spending a few minutes there when I could, checking on things. The mindless, pleasant attention that gardening requires. James's car was in the driveway. Early for him too. I noticed he usually wasn't home until after 7. I came in through the back door quietly, not deliberately, quietly, simply the natural quietness of a person entering their own home when they do not expect to need to announce themselves. And I heard his voice, coming from the living room, low and private, with the particular quality of a conversation being conducted carefully. I know, I'll figure it out. A pause. She'll be home soon. I have to go. Another pause. I know. Me too. And then silence. I stood in the kitchen doorway for what felt like a very long time, but was probably no more than 10 seconds. Then I moved to the counter, set down my bag, filled a glass of water from the tap, and was standing there when James came into the kitchen 30 seconds later. Phone in his pocket, face composed. "You're back early," he said. His voice was easy. His smile was easy. His entire manner was easy in the way that manner sometimes is, when it is being very carefully managed. "Meeting was postponed," I said. "Lucky evening." "Lucky," he agreed. And he moved to the refrigerator to figure out dinner. And the conversation shifted to ordinary things. And I stood at the kitchen counter with my glass of water and smiled at all the right moments. But inside, underneath the smile, underneath the ordinary evening that continued to unfold around us, something had changed. "She'll be home soon." Me too. I turned those words over all through dinner, all through the evening, all through the night, lying beside him in the dark while he slept with the complete ease of a man who had no idea that anything had shifted. I did not confront him. Something, instinct, or the particular intelligence that lives below conscious thought, stopped me. "Not yet," it said. "Not like this. Not when you have only a feeling and 2 sentences. Wait, watch. No. Everything before you show that you know anything." I was not, by nature, a strategic person. But that night, something in me became 1*. The following morning, I woke up before the alarm. I lay in the gray early light and I made a decision. I was going to pay attention. Completely, carefully, without letting anything show. I was going to watch and listen and notice and build a picture so complete, so undeniable, that when I finally moved, if I finally moved, I would move from a position of total clarity rather than suspicion and hurt, and the dangerous emotional vulnerability of someone who is reacting before they fully understand what they are reacting to. I had spent 11 years watching Serena leap first and figure out the landing later. I was not going to make that mistake. I was going to know before I acted. Completely know. And then I was going to decide with full information, with full control of myself, what I wanted to do. The first thing I did was begin paying attention to James's phone, not obsessively. I was not the kind of person who grabbed a partner's phone the moment they left the room. But I began noticing patterns that I had previously not been tracking the way it was always with him now. Always within reach. always face down when it sat on a surface. The way he sometimes took it to the bathroom, even when the journey to the bathroom was 30 seconds. Small things. Individual meaningless things. But a pattern is not made of individual things. A pattern is made of the relationship between them. Within 10 days, I had noticed enough to understand that the phone was a site of something deliberate. The second thing I did was begin paying attention to timing. James's schedule was not complicated or particularly varied. He had a studio, project meetings, site visits. He was generally predictable. But I began noticing, quietly, the evenings that ran later than usual. The Saturday morning once a month when he was gone before I woke up. The occasional lunch hour that extended, unremarked, into early afternoon. None of these things, individually, would have registered. Together, they built something asterisk. The third thing I did, and this is the part that required the most careful management of my own emotions, was pay attention to Serena. I began listening to our conversations differently. Not for specific confessions or obvious slips. She was too smart for those. But for the gaps. The things she didn't say. The moments where a question went slightly differently than it should have. Where a detail was offered that she shouldn't have had. Where her knowledge of James's schedule or preferences or recent experiences exceeded what I had told her. And I found them small gaps. Tiny inconsistencies. The almost imperceptible misalignments of a story that is being carefully maintained from multiple directions. Has James been stressed lately? She had asked me once, weeks earlier, in a way I had absorbed without question. He seemed a bit off the last time I saw him. I had taken that at face value. Of course I had, why wouldn't I? They moved in overlapping circles, ran into each other at mutual events. But now I returned to it, the last time she saw him. Where was it? Something she had mentioned to me, some gathering, some occasion I was aware of. I went back through my memory carefully, and I could not locate the encounter she was describing within any context I knew about, which meant she had seen him somewhere. I didn't know about which, meant it wasn't an accidental encounter. I sat with that understanding. For a very long time, the confirmation came on a Saturday. James had left that morning for what he described as a site visit, a project in the early stages. A building on the edge of the city he had been consulting on. He had mentioned it the previous evening with the casual, unremarkable detail of a man describing a routine professional obligation. I had nodded. I had said, "Have a good morning." After he left, I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about what I was doing and whether I was building a case from nothing. Whether I was the woman who had convinced herself of a terrible thing that was not true, who had let one overheard phone call rewrite a whole marriage. I considered that possibility, seriously and honestly, and then I picked up my phone and opened the location sharing app. It had been James's idea originally. 2 years ago, practical reasoning, coordinating schedules, knowing when the other was close to home, the simple usefulness of a tool that saved unnecessary phone calls. We had both set it up without any sense of it being surveillance. It was not surveillance. It was convenience. He had forgotten it existed. Asterisk, the little pin that represented James sat on my screen, perfectly still. Not at the edge of the city where the project site was, in the center of town, at a coffee shop that I recognized immediately. Serena had mentioned it to me, almost in passing 6 weeks ago. That place on Clement Street is my new favorite. Have you been? I had not been. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that pin for a very long time. Then I set my phone face down on the table, and I sat with what I now understood. The grief arrived, not as a wave but as a weight, heavy and slow, settling into the chest, pressing on everything. Not the sharp sudden shock of unexpected news I had been building toward this understanding for weeks. And the confirmation when it came was in some ways less devastating than the suspicion had been, because at least now I knew. At least now, the shape of things was clear. But knowing does not make the grief smaller, it just makes it specific. And grief, that is specific grief that has names and faces and 11 years of shared history attached to it, is the kind that sits the deepest. I cried that afternoon, alone in the kitchen, with the coffee going cold in front of me, and the Saturday outside continuing entirely indifferently. I let it be as large as it was. I did not manage it or redirect it or tell myself to be strong. I was strong enough to feel it fully. That is strength, I think. The willingness to let the truth be as heavy as it actually is, rather than reducing it to something more manageable. To let yourself grieve what is real before you start building what comes next. I gave myself that Saturday afternoon. By evening, I had made a decision. I called my sister Nina. Nina is 4 years older than me and has always been in our family's particular emotional ecosystem. The one who operates closest to the ground, practical, clear-eyed. The person you call when you need someone who will not perform comfort, but will instead help you think. I told her everything. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. How long have you known? She asked. Known, suspected, 3 weeks. Known, confirmed, since this afternoon. And he doesn't know, you know. No, Serena doesn't know either. No. Another silence. What do you want to do? Nina asked Daunt. And that was the question I had been sitting with all afternoon. Not what should I do? The should was clear enough, in broad strokes. But what do I want? What outcome, what ending, what final shape did I want this to take? I want them to understand, I said slowly, what they threw away. Not just privately. I want there to be a moment, a clear, witnessed, undeniable moment when they understand exactly what they did and exactly who they did it to. That requires planning, Nina said. I know, I said. Then plan. I contacted a lawyer the following week. A woman named Patricia, recommended through a colleague's quiet, trusted referral, a professional who handled these situations with the particular efficiency of someone who had seen every version of them and had long since stopped being surprised. Our first meeting was businesslike and clear. I explained the situation. She asked questions. She outlined my options, the legal landscape, what I could establish, what protections I had, what the process would look like when I chose to initiate it. She told me to document everything. I was already documenting everything. Had created a folder on a personal device that James had no access to, a tablet I had bought for work several years ago that lived in my office at work rather than in our shared home. Into that folder went dates, times, observations, photographs of the location data, screenshots where I had them, a written record of every notable moment over the past weeks. I was thorough. I was organized. I was completely, deliberately calm. And every day, I went home to my husband, and I cooked dinner or ordered takeout, and I watched television on the sofa and talked about ordinary things, and I let him believe completely, without a single crack, that I had no idea. It was during the 3rd week of this parallel existence, the visible life and the hidden preparation running simultaneously, that something happened I had not anticipated. Serena called on a Tuesday evening. We talked for nearly an hour. About her work, about a book we had both been meaning to read, about a friend's upcoming birthday. It was a completely ordinary conversation, warm and easy and entirely familiar. And I had it, all of it, with the same warmth I had always brought to our friendship. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, because the complicated thing, the thing I had not fully prepared myself for, was that being on that call with Serena did not feel like talking to an enemy. It felt like talking to my best friend. The one I had had for 11 years. The one whose voice I had called one of my favorite sounds for a decade. And underneath the strategy, and the planning and the calm and the quiet fury, there was this other thing. This grief that was specifically about her. Not about what she had done in the abstract, but about who she was to me. About 11 years of real, genuine, sustaining friendship that I now had to hold alongside the knowledge of what she had been doing inside that friendship. Those two things were both true at the same time. That, I think, was the hardest part of all of it, not the anger. Anger is clean in its way. It has a direction and a purpose, and it propels you forward. But grief for someone who has hurt you, grief for the friendship itself, for the loss of the person you believed they were, that has no direction. It just sits there. I let it sit there. I did not let it stop me. By the end of the 4th week, I had everything I needed. Documents, legal consultation, financial preparations, My own account, my own foundation. The quiet reorganization of what was mine and what was shared and what I needed to protect. I told 2 people, Nina and Patricia. I had not told a single mutual friend, not a single colleague, not a single person within the shared social world that James and Serena and I all inhabited, because I had also, by this point, decided how I wanted this to end. Not in a private room, not in a managed conversation where the truth came out quietly, between 3 people, and could then be shaped and minimized, and managed in the retelling in public in front of the people whose respect and regard both of them valued most. We had a dinner tradition in our friend group, an annual gathering, hosted on rotation. An evening that everyone attended, that had become a consistent ritual of the past several years. That year, it was our turn to host. Serena had offered to help me organize it. Of course she had. I had a group dinner. I had a hostess. I had 14 people who would be sitting at my table in exactly 18 days. I began to plan. Those 18 days were the strangest of my life. On the surface, completely ordinary. Work, evenings, weekends, the comfortable domestic texture of a life that appeared intact. James, slightly more present than he had been in recent months. I noticed this and understood it. Kara, whoever she was, whatever she was to him, had perhaps receded slightly, and in her absence he had oriented back toward home without any awareness that home had already, irrevocably changed. He was kind. He was attentive. He brought me coffee on a Saturday morning and sat on the edge of the bed and talked about a project he was excited about. And I listened, and I was warm, and I thought, this is who you could have been. This is who you were, for a long time. And you chose something else, and you are the only one in this room who doesn't know yet that I know. Serena came over twice in those 18 days. Once to help plan the dinner menu. We sat at my kitchen table with notebooks and laptops and wine. And she was entirely herself, and I was entirely myself. And it was the most extraordinary performance I have ever given in my life. Not because I pretended to be happy, but because I genuinely was, in some complicated, compartmentalist way, happy to be with her. Happy in the way you are happy when you are with someone you love, even when that love is currently coexisting with something devastating. The human heart is not a simple instrument. The second time she came was 3 days before the dinner, to help with logistics. We made lists. We laughed about something neither of us could later have remembered. She hugged me goodbye at the front door and said, I love you, you know? I'm so lucky you're my person. I hugged her back. Me too, I said. And I meant it. And it was also the last time I would say it. The evening of the dinner arrived with the particular beauty that late spring sometimes produces: warm air, long light, the kind of evening that makes everything look slightly more luminous than usual. I had spent the afternoon preparing. The table was set carefully. The food was organized. The house was warm and welcoming, and exactly what it had always been on these evenings. A place people were genuinely happy to arrive at. James helped with the final preparations. He was in good spirits, relaxed, warm, present in the way he had been in recent weeks. He put music on and poured himself a small glass of wine while he straightened things in the living room. And at one point he came up behind me in the kitchen and kissed the side of my head the way he sometimes did. It's going to be a great evening, he said. It is, I agreed. He had no idea how right he was. Serena arrived first, as arranged nominally to help with any last-minute things, though everything was already done. She came in with a bottle of wine and that particular energy she carried into rooms, that warmth and brightness that I had loved for 11 years. She hugged me at the door. You look beautiful, she said. Thank you, I said. So do you. We went into the kitchen together, and she poured herself a glass of the wine she'd brought and leaned against the counter in the familiar, easy way she had done in every kitchen she'd ever stood in with me. And we talked about nothing while the last hour before the other guests arrived unfolded around us. I watched her. I felt in those minutes, everything at once. The grief and the love and the fury and the strange, crystalline calm of a person who has been preparing for something for a very long time, and has now arrived at the moment of it. I felt completely, entirely present. The guests arrived over the following 40 minutes. 14 people in total, couples and singles. People we had known for years. People who had been at our wedding. People who knew both James and Serena as people they respected and cared for, and trusted. The evening unfolded exactly as these evenings always did. Drinks and conversation in the living room. The comfortable noise of people who know each other well. Stories and laughter, and the particular warmth of a gathering that has established its own rhythm over years. James moved through it easily. Serena was sparkling, telling a story to a group of 4 people near the fireplace, her hands moving expressively. The group leaning in and laughing at exactly the right moments. I watched both of them. I smiled. I refilled glasses. I was the perfect hostess. And underneath all of it, I was completely, extraordinarily steady. We sat down to dinner at 8:30. The table was full and warm and loud with overlapping conversation. Food was passed, wine was poured. The particular pleasure of a long table shared with people you genuinely like settled over everything. The first course happened without anything. Let people eat and talk and exist inside the ease of the evening. I waited. The second course was clearing when I set down my fork and straightened slightly and said, I hope you'll bear with me for a moment. I have something I'd like to share. The table quietened in the natural, curious way that a table quietens when someone is about to say something they've signaled is important. A few smiles, the assumption, probably, of an announcement, a toast, something warm and celebratory. Given the setting, James looked at me with the mildly curious, comfortable expression of a man who had no idea. Serena looked at me with a smile that, I noticed, had something watchful at the edges of it. I held both of their gazes for a moment. Then I began. I had spent considerable time deciding what to say, and how to say it. Not a speech. Not a performance. Not anything that could be described afterward as a scene or an outburst, or something to be explained away by emotion. Simply the truth. Delivered clearly, calmly, with the particular authority of a person who has had 5 weeks to understand exactly what they want to communicate, and has reduced it to its most essential form. I told them I had discovered, approximately 5 weeks ago, that my husband had been seeing someone. I told them the name. I watched Serena's face change. I watched James go completely still. I placed my phone on the table, the location data, the dates, the pattern made visible and undeniable, and I said, without raising my voice, that I had spent 5 weeks gathering information rather than reacting, because I had wanted to understand the full picture before I did anything with it. And then I said the thing I had been building toward. I said that the woman James had been seeing was Serena. The table absorbed this in complete silence for a moment that was longer than it probably sounds. I watched the faces around me shift through several things very quickly: confusion, disbelief, the recalibration of people processing information that reorders what they thought they understood. And in the middle of all of those faces, to faces that were no longer able to perform anything at all, James had gone a specific shade of pale that I had never seen on him before. Not the flush of embarrassment or the redness of anger, the white of someone who has just understood the full scope of something. Serena. Serena, who was the most composed person I had ever known, who could hold a room and tell a story and make every person around her feel simultaneously seen and entertained. Serena could not find her face. She tried. I watched her try, but the particular effort of composing an expression when you have just been named, in front of 14 people who know you, as the person who did this, that is an effort that has no successful outcome. She sat very still. She said nothing. James said my name, just that. Just my, and in his voice were so many things at once. Apology and exposure, and the particular desperation of a person trying to locate a foothold in something that has none, that I felt, briefly and against my will, something that was almost close to compassion. Almost. I know, I said quietly. I know everything, James. 5 weeks ago he closed his eyes. I want to be clear, I said to the table, to everyone. Not just to him. Not just to her, that I am not telling you this to cause pain or embarrassment, although I understand that it does both. I am telling you because these 2 people have been part of our community for a long time. Because the things we understand about people within a community, who they are, what they value, how they treat the people closest to them. Those things matter. And I believe that everyone here deserves to understand them accurately. A pause. I said, spent 5 weeks saying nothing. I would like everyone to know that I know how to say nothing for a very long time when I need to. That has perhaps not been evident before now. Something shifted around the table. Not laughter, the moment was too grave for that, but something adjacent to it. A recognition. I picked up my glass. Patricia, my lawyer, will be in contact this week, I said to James, without looking at him. I've made arrangements for this evening and the next few days. Tonight, I'd like everyone to finish dinner. I looked around the table. The lamb is very good, I said. I'd hate for it to go cold. I will tell you what happened next, because it did not unfold like a scene in a film. James pushed back his chair and excused himself from the table. He went upstairs. I heard him up there, the movement of a person who does not know what to do with themselves in a confined space. He came back down 20 minutes later, after most of the table had resumed a subdued, careful version of conversation, and he said quietly that he was going to leave for the evening. I nodded. He left. Serena sat at the table for perhaps 10 minutes after James left. No one spoke to her, not unkindly, but the table had reconfigured around what had been revealed, and there was no comfortable place within it for her anymore. She stood eventually. She came around the table to where I was sitting. She stood in front of me for a moment. Maya, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at her. I did not make it easier for her. I did not offer anything. I'm sorry, she said. I know it's not enough. You don't need to explain tonight, I said. There's nothing you could say tonight that would mean anything yet. Maybe someday. Not tonight. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked down the hallway and out the front door and closed it quietly behind her. And I sat at my table, in my home, surrounded by the people who had just witnessed the ending of the version of my life I had believed in, and I exhaled. Slowly, completely. For the first time in 5 weeks. I exhaled all the way. The people who remained, and almost all of them remained, did something that I did not expect, and that I have thought about many times. Since. They stayed. Not out of obligation or the awkward compulsion to see something through. They stayed. My friend Clara reached across the table and refilled my wine. David, who had known James for years, asked quietly if I needed anything practical handled in the next few days. Nadia, who cried very easily and made no apologies for it, cried not with the drama of someone making a scene but with the simple, honest expression of someone who felt what had happened. We finished dinner, not as if nothing had occurred, but as the particular gathered warmth of people who have witnessed something real together and chosen, in response to it, to stay close. I was grateful for that in a way I do not have adequate words for. The months that followed were difficult, in all the ways that the practical ending of a marriage is difficult. Legal processes are not designed for emotional efficiency. There are forms and meetings and conversations about the concrete division of a shared life, the house, the finances, the accumulated physical evidence of years together. James was not obstructive. I think the manner in which everything had come out publicly, completely, with 5 weeks of prepared documentation behind it, had removed any sense that there was anything to be gained by making the process harder than it needed to be. We handled it with the particular careful distance of two people who have moved from intimacy to the formal management of an ending. It was not easy, but it was clear. Serena reached out twice in the months that followed. The first time, a message long, careful, the particular architecture of an apology that is also an attempt at explanation. I read it. I did not reply. The second time, 3 months later, a brief note. No explanation this time. Just, I miss you. I understand if this is the end. I just wanted you to know. I sat with that one for a long time. I am still sitting with it, in some ways. Because the grief for Serena has not resolved the way the grief for the marriage has. The marriage has ended, and I can feel the ending solid, complete, something that happened and is now part of my history rather than my present. But Serena is more complicated. 11 years of genuine friendship. does not become simple just because something terrible happened. Inside of it, I have not replied. Don't know yet whether I ever will. I am allowing myself to not. No, I am going to tell you where I am now. It has been almost a year since the dinner. I am still in the house. That was one of the outcomes of the legal process, and one I was glad of. Because the house was something I chose, and something I love, and it seemed wrong to lose it as collateral damage of something that was not my fault. I have repainted 2 rooms. Small thing, but significant. The particular claiming of a space that is now entirely your own. I have been absorbed, in the best possible way, by work, by manuscripts and writers, and the particular pleasure of a job that requires you to care about words and meaning and the architecture of a story. Work saved me during those months, in the way that purpose always saves you. The requirement to show up and be useful and produce something is, in difficult seasons, an extraordinary gift. I have spent a great deal of time with Nina, with Clara, with the people who stayed at the table. I started doing things alone that I used to do with James, the farmers market on Saturdays, the long walks on Sunday mornings, and found that aloneness, while different, is not the diminishment I feared it would be. There is a particular quality to your own company, when you have learned to trust yourself. That is actually quite good. I want to close this story by saying something that surprised me when I understood it. I do not regret how I handled this. Not the 5 weeks of silence and preparation. Not the dinner. Not the public nature of the revelation. I have examined those choices many times for cruelty, for excess, for the satisfaction of causing pain, and what I find, when I am completely honest with myself, is that none of those things were the motivation. The motivation was clarity. I wanted a clear ending, an ending that could not be minimized or rewritten or managed in the retelling. An ending in which the truth was witnessed, and the witnesses were people who had known all 3 of us for years and deserved to understand what they had been told versus what was real. And I wanted to be the one who controlled when and how, and in front of whom the truth came out. Not because I am a cruel person, but because I am a precise one, and because the 5 weeks of preparation had shown me something about myself that I had not previously known, that I am capable of far more stillness, far more patience, far more strategic composure than I had ever been required to demonstrate before. They thought I was clueless. I was the most informed person in every room. They thought my warmth meant I would not see clearly. My warmth had nothing to do with my clarity. They were never in conflict. They thought that because I was kind, I was also soft. That kindness and strength lived at opposite ends of a spectrum, and a person could only occupy one end. They were wrong about that. Kindness, I have come to understand, is not the absence of strength. It is strength directed outward rather than inward. And when it is turned around, when a kind person is finally protecting themselves, rather than everyone else, the force of it is something that takes everyone by surprise, including, sometimes, the kind person herself. If there is a lesson in this story, and I am wary of lessons, because real experiences resist the tidiness of lessons, it is perhaps this: do not perform your awareness. If you know something, you do not need to immediately show that you know it. The knowing is yours. The timing of how you use it is yours. The shape of the ending is yours to build, carefully, on your own timeline. From a position of complete information rather than raw and vulnerable shock. Take the time you need, not to delay indefinitely, not to avoid, but to understand completely, to prepare fully, to arrive at the moment of confrontation, or the moment of simply walking out as someone who knows exactly where they stand, and exactly what they deserve, and know what you deserve. That is, perhaps, the most essential part, because the reason I was able to be patient, to be still, to build something rather than simply react, was that I was clear, underneath all of it, about my own worth, about what I had brought to the marriage and the friendship, about what had been taken from me and what had not, because there are things that betrayal cannot take. The years of genuine love you gave, the friendship that was real, even if it was also, simultaneously, something else. The version of yourself you showed up as, honestly and consistently, every single day, those things remain. They are not erased by what someone else chose to do inside them. They are yours. And no one, no amount of betrayal or deception or hidden double life can take back the integrity with which you lived. You're part of the story. I still have the coffee shop on Clement Street saved in my maps. I have never gone. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I will sit at a table by the window and order something and look around at the ordinary beauty of a Saturday morning and understand that a place is just a place, that it has no power over me, no claim on my peace. Or maybe I will always choose a different coffee shop on Saturday mornings. Either way, I am the one who gets to decide. And that, after everything, is exactly enough to every woman carrying a truth she hasn't yet decided what to do with. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to know before you show. You are allowed to build something careful and considered and entirely yours before you let anyone see that you have been building at all. Your strength does not have to announce itself. It just has to be there, and it is. It always was.